The Cosmic Encounter. The space station Elysium 7 floated silently in the void, a beacon of human ingenuity amidst the stars. Its sleek metallic hull glimmered under the light of a distant sun, its corridors bustling with scientists, engineers, and diplomats. Among them was Kale, a brilliant astrophysicist whose curiosity had brought him to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. His dark hair was perpetually tousled, and his sharp green eyes were always scanning the stars, searching for answers to questions no one else dared to ask. Kale was in his lab, analyzing data from a newly discovered nebula, when the alert came. An Etherian diplomatic vessel was approaching the station. The Etherians were a mysterious species, known for their advanced technology and reclusive nature. Their sudden interest in peace negotiations had surprised everyone, including Kale. As the station prepared for the arrival, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would change everything. He stood in the observation deck, watching as the Etherian ship docked. Its design was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek and organic, with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. The airlock hissed open, and the Etherian delegation stepped onto the station. At their forefront was Zanara, a striking figure with skin that shimmered like starlight and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intensity. Her presence commanded attention, and Kale found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. Their first meeting was brief, a formal exchange of greetings, but Kale felt something shift in the air. When their eyes met, it was as if the universe itself had paused, holding its breath. Zanara's gaze lingered on him, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Later that evening, Kale found himself unable to focus on his work. His thoughts kept drifting back to Zanara, to the way her voice had resonated in his mind, to the way her presence had stirred something deep within him. He decided to take a walk through the station's gardens, hoping to clear his mind. The gardens were a rare luxury on a space station, a testament to humanity's determination to bring life to the stars. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the soft hum of the station's systems created a soothing backdrop. Kale was lost in thought when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Zanara approaching, her movements graceful and deliberate. She stopped a few feet away, her glowing eyes studying him with an intensity that made his heart race. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice melodic yet firm. Kale raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on his lips. "Is that a compliment?" "An observation," she replied, stepping closer. "Your energy is different. It calls to me." Kale felt a shiver run down his spine. "I could say the same about you," he admitted. "There's something about you that feels familiar." Zanara's expression softened, and for a moment, she seemed almost vulnerable. "Our species are not so different," she said quietly. "We both seek connection, even if we do not always understand it." They stood in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Zanara spoke again. "There is something you should know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My people experience a rare phenomenon called the stellar bond. It is a connection that transcends species, a bond that forms when two souls are destined to meet." Kale's breath caught in his throat. "Are you saying?" "Yes," Zanara interrupted, her eyes locking onto his. "I feel it forming with you." The revelation left Kale speechless. He had always believed in the power of science, in the ability to explain the universe through logic and reason. But this was something beyond his understanding. It was as if the stars themselves had conspired to bring them together. As they stood there, the station's lights dimmed, casting the garden in a soft, ethereal glow. The air between them crackled with energy, and Kale felt a pull he couldn't resist. He reached out, his fingers brushing against Zanara's hand. Her skin was warm, almost electric, and the contact sent a jolt through his entire being. Zanara's breath hitched, and for a moment, they were lost in each other. But then, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. Zanara stepped back, her expression unreadable. "We must be careful," she said. The stellar bond is not easily accepted by my people. Kale nodded, his mind racing with questions. But before he could say anything, Zanara turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the garden. He watched her go, a strange mix of excitement and apprehension settling in his chest. As he returned to his quarters, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The stars had always been his passion, his purpose. But now, they seemed to hold a new mystery, one that was as beautiful as it was terrifying. And at the center of it all was Zanara, a woman who had stepped into his life like a comet, bright and unstoppable. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain, he would follow her into the unknown, no matter where it led. The forbidden attraction. The days that followed Zanara's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for Kale. He found himself constantly distracted, his thoughts consumed by the enigmatic Etherian diplomat. Their brief encounter in the garden had left him with more questions than answers, and the weight of the stellar bond hung over him like a storm cloud. Zanara, too, seemed affected by their connection. Though she maintained her composed demeanor during official meetings, Kale noticed the way her gaze lingered on him, the subtle shifts in her expression when their eyes met. It was as if an invisible thread tied them together, pulling them closer despite the barriers between their worlds. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Kale found himself wandering the station's observation deck. The vast expanse of space stretched out before him, a tapestry of stars and nebulae that never failed to inspire awe. He leaned against the glass, his breath fogging the surface as he stared into the void. "You seem troubled," a familiar voice said behind him. Kale turned to see Zanara standing there, her luminous eyes reflecting the starlight. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant gown that shimmered like liquid silver, her presence both commanding and soothing. "Just thinking," Kale replied, offering her a small smile. "About the universe. About us." Zanara stepped closer, her movements graceful and deliberate. "The stellar bond is not something to be taken lightly," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It is a connection that transcends time and space, a force that cannot be denied." Kale nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I can feel it," he admitted. "It's like a pull, something I can't explain." Zanara's expression softened, and for a moment, she seemed almost vulnerable. "It is the same for me," she confessed. "But we must be careful. My people do not look kindly on such bonds, especially with those outside our species." Kale frowned, his curiosity piqued. "Why? If it's a natural phenomenon, why would they forbid it?" Zanara hesitated, her gaze drifting to the stars. "Our society is built on control," she explained. "We value order above all else. The stellar bond is seen as a disruption, a threat to the stability we have worked so hard to maintain." Kale reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. "That doesn't make it wrong," he said gently. "Sometimes, the things that challenge us are the ones that help us grow." Zanara's breath hitched at his touch, and for a moment, they stood there, their hands barely touching but their connection undeniable. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," she murmured, her voice filled with wonder. "Your mind, your spirit, they call to me in ways I cannot ignore." Kale felt a surge of warmth at her words, his heart swelling with emotions he couldn't fully comprehend. "I feel the same way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But what do we do? We can't just ignore this." Zanara's eyes met his, and in their depths, he saw a flicker of determination. "We follow the bond," she said firmly. "We explore it, understand it. But we must do so in secret. If my people discover what is happening between us, they will not hesitate to separate us." Kale nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll be careful," he said. "But I won't let fear dictate our actions. If this bond is real, then it's worth fighting for." Zanara's lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time, Kale saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You are brave, Kale," she said. "Braver than most. It is one of the things that draws me to you." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and Zanara quickly stepped back, her composed mask slipping back into place. "We should not be seen together like this," she said, her voice low. "It would raise too many questions." Kale nodded, though his heart ached at the distance between them. "When can I see you again?" he asked, his voice filled with longing. Zanara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the corridor. "Tomorrow night," she said finally. "Meet me in the gardens. We will speak more then." With that, she turned and walked away, her silver gown shimmering in the dim light. Kale watched her go, his mind racing with thoughts of what the future might hold. The stellar bond was a mystery, a force he didn't fully understand, but one thing was certain: he was willing to risk everything to explore it. The next day passed in a blur, Kale's anticipation growing with each passing hour. He found it difficult to focus on his work, his thoughts constantly drifting to Zanara and the bond they shared. When evening finally arrived, he made his way to the gardens, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Zanara was already there, standing beneath a canopy of glowing flowers. She turned as he approached, her eyes lighting up with a warmth that made his breath catch. "You came," she said, her voice filled with relief. "Of course," Kale replied, stepping closer. "I couldn't stay away." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with an electric energy. Then, Zanara reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "The bond grows stronger," she murmured, her touch sending shivers down his spine. "I can feel it, like a fire burning within me." Kale leaned into her touch, his heart swelling with emotions he couldn't name. "What does it mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means we are connected," Zanara replied, her eyes searching his. "Our souls are intertwined, bound by a force greater than either of us. But it also means we must be careful. The bond is powerful, but it is also fragile." Kale nodded, his resolve hardening. "I understand," he said. "But I won't let fear stop us. If this bond is real, then it's worth protecting." Zanara's lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time, Kale saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You are brave, Kale," she said. "Braver than most. It is one of the things that draws me to you." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and Zanara quickly stepped back, her composed mask slipping back into place. "We should not be seen together like this," she said, her voice low. "It would raise too many questions." Kale nodded, though his heart ached at the distance between them. "When can I see you again?" he asked, his voice filled with longing. Zanara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the corridor. "Tomorrow night," she said finally. "Meet me in the gardens. We will speak more then." With that, she turned and walked away, her silver gown shimmering in the dim light. Kale watched her go, his mind racing with thoughts of what the future might hold. The stellar bond was a mystery, a force he didn't fully understand, but one thing was certain: he was willing to risk everything to explore it. The station's corridors were unusually quiet as Kale made his way to the gardens that night. The hum of the station's systems seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. His heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and unease, the weight of the stellar bond pressing heavily on his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something big. When he arrived, Zanara was already there, her silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of the bioluminescent plants. She turned as he approached, her luminous eyes filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "You came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you I would," Kale replied, stepping closer. "What's wrong? You seem troubled." Zanara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the stars beyond the station's glass walls. "My people have discovered our bond," she said finally, her voice heavy with regret. "They are sending enforcers to separate us." Kale's heart sank, a cold dread settling in his chest. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Not long, Zanara replied, her hands trembling as she reached for his. They will be here within hours. We must leave before they arrive. Kale nodded, his mind racing. Where can we go? The station is the only safe place out here. Zanara's eyes met his, and in their depths, he saw a flicker of determination. There is a planet, she said. Hidden, uncharted. My people do not know of its existence. We can go there, at least for a while. Kale took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. Then let's go, he said. We'll figure out the rest later. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Kale led the way to the station's docking bay, his knowledge of the systems allowing them to bypass security protocols. As they approached the bay, however, the sound of alarms blared through the station, red lights flashing ominously. They're here, Zanara said, her voice tight with urgency. We must hurry. Kale's heart raced as they sprinted the remaining distance to the docking bay. The Enforcer's ship was already visible through the bay's windows, its sleek, menacing design a stark contrast to the station's utilitarian aesthetic. Kale quickly accessed the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys as he initiated the launch sequence for a small escape pod. Get in, he said, gesturing to the pod. I'll be right behind you. Zanara hesitated, her eyes filled with concern. What about you? I need to disable the station's tracking systems, Kale explained. If I don't, they'll follow us no matter where we go. Zanara nodded, though her expression remained troubled. Be careful, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I cannot lose you. Kale gave her a reassuring smile. You won't, he said. Now go. I'll meet you on the planet. With that, Zanara stepped into the pod, her luminous eyes locked on his until the hatch closed. Kale watched as the pod launched, his heart aching at the sight of her disappearing into the void. Then, he turned and ran back into the station, his mind focused on the task at hand. The control room was a maze of screens and consoles, but Kale's familiarity with the systems allowed him to navigate it with ease. He quickly accessed the tracking systems, his fingers flying over the keys as he input the commands to disable them. Just as he was about to finish, however, the door hissed open, and a group of Etherian enforcers stepped inside. Step away from the console, one of them commanded, his voice cold and authoritative. Kale froze, his heart pounding in his chest. This is a human station, he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. You have no jurisdiction here. We are acting under galactic law, the enforcer replied, stepping closer. The bond between you and the diplomat is forbidden. You will come with us. Kale's mind raced, searching for a way out. Then, he noticed the emergency override switch on the console. Without hesitation, he slammed his hand down on it, triggering a system-wide lockdown. The station's lights flickered, and the enforcers stumbled as the artificial gravity shifted. Kale used the distraction to his advantage, darting past the enforcers and out of the control room. He sprinted through the corridors, his heart pounding as he made his way to the docking bay. The enforcers were close behind, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. When he reached the bay, he quickly accessed the control panel, his fingers trembling as he initiated the launch sequence for another escape pod. Just as the hatch opened, however, the enforcers burst into the bay, their weapons trained on him. Stop, one of them shouted. You cannot escape. Kale hesitated, his mind racing. Then, he noticed the emergency release lever for the bay doors. Without a second thought, he pulled it, the doors hissing open and exposing the bay to the vacuum of space. The enforcers were sucked out into the void, their screams silenced as the air rushed out of the bay. Kale quickly sealed the doors and climbed into the escape pod, his hands shaking as he initiated the launch sequence. The pod shot out of the bay, the station growing smaller in the distance as he sped toward the hidden planet. As the pod hurtled through space, Kale's thoughts turned to Zanara. He hoped she had made it to the planet safely, that she was waiting for him. The stellar bond pulsed within him, a constant reminder of their connection. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. The escape pod hurtled through the void, its small frame trembling as it entered the atmosphere of the hidden planet. Kale gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white as he guided the pod through the turbulent descent. The planet's surface came into view, a lush, vibrant world filled with towering forests and shimmering lakes. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a paradise hidden among the stars. As the pod touched down in a clearing, Kale took a moment to catch his breath, his heart still racing from the escape. He stepped out onto the planet's surface, the air warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. The sky above was a deep shade of purple, dotted with two suns that cast a golden glow over the landscape. "Zenara," he whispered, his voice filled with hope and longing. He activated the pod's tracking system, searching for her signal. To his relief, it didn't take long to find her. She was nearby, her presence a beacon in the wilderness. Kale followed the signal, his footsteps quick and determined. The forest around him was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment of the space station. As he walked, he couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of this hidden world. It felt like a place out of time, untouched by the conflicts of the galaxy. Finally, he emerged into a clearing and saw her. Zenara stood by a crystal-clear lake, her silver gown shimmering in the sunlight. She turned as he approached, her luminous eyes filled with relief and something else, something deeper. "You made it," she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I told you I would," Kale replied, closing the distance between them. "Are you okay?" Zenara nodded, though her expression was troubled. "I am unharmed," she said. "But we are not safe here. My people will not stop until they find us." Kale reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together." Zenara's gaze softened, and for a moment, they stood there, their connection stronger than ever. Then, she turned and gestured to the lake. "There is something you should see," she said. "Something that may help us understand the bond we share." Kale followed her to the edge of the lake, where the water was so clear he could see the bottom. Zenara knelt and placed her hand on the surface, her touch causing ripples to spread outward. As the ripples reached the center of the lake, the water began to glow, a soft, ethereal light rising from the depths. "What is this?" Kale asked, his voice filled with awe. "An ancient relic," Zenara explained. "Left behind by my ancestors. It holds the secrets of the stellar bond." The light grew brighter, and suddenly, images began to form above the water, holographic projections of Etherian history. Kale watched in fascination as the story unfolded before his eyes. The stellar bond, it seemed, was not just a biological phenomenon but a cosmic force, a connection that transcended species and time. It was a gift, a way for souls to find each other across the vastness of the universe. "This is incredible," Kale said, his voice filled with wonder. "But why would your people forbid it?" Zenara's expression darkened. "Fear," she said simply. "Fear of the unknown, of losing control. But the bond is not something to be feared. It is a source of strength, of unity." Kale nodded, his mind racing with the implications. "If we can show them this," he said, "if we can prove that the bond is a force for good, maybe they'll understand." Zenara hesitated, her gaze drifting to the holographic images. "It will not be easy," she said. "But if anyone can convince them, it is you." Kale reached out, his hand finding hers. "We'll do it together," he said. "We'll show them that love is stronger than fear." Zenara's lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time, Kale saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You are brave, Kale," she said. "Braver than most. It is one of the things that draws me to you." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and Zenara quickly stepped back, her composed mask slipping back into place. We should not linger here, she said, her voice low. The enforcers will not be far behind. Kale nodded, though his heart ached at the distance between them. Where do we go from here? He asked, his voice filled with longing. Zenara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the holographic images. There is a temple, she said finally. Hidden deep within the forest. It holds the key to unlocking the full potential of the stellar bond. If we can reach it, we may be able to strengthen our connection and protect ourselves from those who seek to separate us. Kale's resolve hardened. Then let's go, he said. We'll face whatever challenges lie ahead together. With that, they set off into the forest, their footsteps quick and determined. The path was treacherous, filled with dense undergrowth and hidden dangers, but they pressed on, driven by the bond that tied them together. As they walked, Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, a belief that they were destined for something greater. Finally, they emerged into a clearing, and there it was, the temple. It was a towering structure, its walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with energy. The air around it was thick with power, a tangible force that made Kale's skin tingle. This is it, Zenara said, her voice filled with reverence. The heart of the stellar bond. They stepped inside, the temple's interior bathed in a soft, golden light. At its center was a pedestal, upon which rested a crystal that glowed with the same ethereal light as the lake. Zenara approached it, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the crystal. As her fingers made contact, the temple came alive, the carvings on the walls glowing with a brilliant light. Kale felt a surge of energy, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing moment. It was as if the temple was awakening something within them, unlocking a power they had only begun to understand. This is it, Zenara said, her voice filled with awe. The true power of the stellar bond. Kale stepped closer, his hand finding hers. What does it mean? He asked, his voice filled with wonder. It means we are connected, Zenara replied, her eyes searching his. Not just to each other, but to the universe itself. We are part of something greater, a force that transcends time and space. Kale felt a surge of emotion, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. Then we'll use this power, he said. We'll show the galaxy that love is stronger than fear. Zenara's lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time, Kale saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. You are brave, Kale, she said. Braver than most. It is one of the things that draws me to you. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, and Zenara quickly stepped back, her composed mask slipping back into place. We should not linger here, she said, her voice low. The enforcers will not be far behind. Kale nodded, though his heart ached at the distance between them. Where do we go from here? He asked, his voice filled with longing. Zenara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the holographic images. There is a temple, she said finally. Hidden deep within the forest. It holds the key to unlocking the full potential of the stellar bond. If we can reach it, we may be able to strengthen our connection and protect ourselves from those who seek to separate us. Kale's resolve hardened. Then let's go, he said. We'll face whatever challenges lie ahead together. With that, they set off into the forest, their footsteps quick and determined. The path was treacherous, filled with dense undergrowth and hidden dangers, but they pressed on, driven by the bond that tied them together. As they walked, Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, a belief that they were destined for something greater. Finally, they emerged into a clearing, and there it was, the temple. It was a towering structure, its walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with energy. The air around it was thick with power, a tangible force that made Kale's skin tingle. This is it, Zenara said, her voice filled with reverence. The heart of the stellar bond. The temple's energy pulsed around them, a living, breathing force that seemed to resonate with the very core of their beings. Kale and Zenara stood at the center of it all, their hands intertwined as the power of the stellar bond surged through them. The carvings on the walls glowed brighter, their intricate patterns telling a story of unity, love, and the cosmic connection that bound all life together. "This is it," Zanara whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The true essence of the bond. It's not just about us, it's about everything. The universe itself is connected through this force." Kale felt the truth of her words deep within him. The bond was more than just a connection between two souls, it was a thread that wove through the fabric of existence, linking all living beings in a delicate, intricate web. "We have to share this," he said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming emotions coursing through him. "We have to show the galaxy what this means." Zanara nodded, her luminous eyes filled with determination. "But it won't be easy," she said. "My people are stubborn. They fear what they cannot control." "Then we'll make them see," Kale replied, his grip on her hand tightening. "We'll show them that this bond isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace." As they stood there, the temple's energy began to shift, the light coalescing into a single beam that shot upward, piercing the sky. The beam grew brighter, illuminating the entire planet and sending ripples of energy across the galaxy. It was a signal, a call to all who could feel the bond's power. "What's happening?" Kale asked, his voice filled with wonder. "The temple is awakening," Zanara explained. "It's calling to others who share the bond, to those who understand its true meaning." In the distance, they heard the hum of engines as ships began to descend toward the planet. Kale's heart raced, unsure whether these newcomers were friends or foes. But as the ships landed and their occupants emerged, he saw that they were not Etherian enforcers. They were a diverse group of beings from different species, all drawn together by the bond. "Who are they?" Kale asked, his voice filled with awe. "They are like us," Zanara replied, her eyes shining with hope. "They have felt the bond and answered its call." The newcomers approached, their expressions a mix of curiosity and reverence. Among them was a tall, humanoid figure with shimmering blue skin and glowing eyes, a being Kale recognized as a member of the Lumina, a species known for their deep connection to cosmic energy. "We felt the call," the Lumina said, their voice melodic and soothing. "The bond has awakened, and we are here to stand with you." Zanara stepped forward, her presence commanding yet gentle. "Thank you," she said. "The bond is a gift, one that has been misunderstood for too long. Together, we can show the galaxy its true power." As more beings gathered, Kale felt a sense of unity unlike anything he had ever experienced. These were strangers, yet they were connected by something far greater than themselves. The bond had brought them together, and now, they would fight to protect it. But their moment of unity was short-lived. The sound of approaching engines filled the air, and Kale's heart sank as he saw the sleek, menacing ships of the Etherian enforcers descending toward the planet. "They're here," Zanara said, her voice tight with urgency. "We must be ready." Kale nodded, his resolve hardening. "We'll face them together," he said. "We'll show them that the bond is stronger than their fear." The enforcers landed, their ranks forming a formidable line as they approached the temple. At their forefront was a tall, imposing figure with cold, calculating eyes, Commander Viren, the leader of the Etherian forces. "Zanara," Viren said, his voice cold and authoritative. "You have betrayed your people. Surrender now, and we may show you mercy." Zanara stepped forward, her luminous eyes blazing with defiance. "I have not betrayed my people," she said. "I have embraced the truth. The bond is not a threat, it is a gift. One that you fear because you do not understand it." Viren's expression darkened. "The bond is a disruption, a danger to the order we have worked so hard to maintain. It must be eradicated." "You're wrong," Kale said, stepping forward to stand beside Zanara. "The bond is a force for unity, for love. It connects us all, and it's something worth fighting for." Viren's gaze shifted to Kale, his eyes narrowing. "You are a fool," he said. "This bond will destroy you both." "Then let it," Zanara replied, her voice filled with conviction. "Because we would rather live a single moment connected by the bond than an eternity without it." The tension between them was palpable, the air crackling with energy. Then, without warning, Viren raised his hand, signaling his forces to attack. The enforcers surged forward, their weapons gleaming in the light of the temple. Kale and Zanara stood their ground, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing moment. As the enforcers approached, the other beings who had answered the bond's call stepped forward, forming a protective circle around them. "We stand with you," the Lumina said, their voice filled with determination. "The bond unites us all." The battle that followed was fierce, a clash of light and energy as the two sides fought for control. Kale and Zanara fought side by side, their connection giving them strength and clarity. The bond pulsed within them, guiding their movements and amplifying their abilities. As the battle raged on, Kale noticed something strange. The enforcers' attacks seemed to falter, their movements growing sluggish and uncertain. It was as if the bond's energy was affecting them, weakening their resolve. "What's happening?" Kale asked, his voice filled with wonder. "The bond is reaching them," Zanara replied, her eyes shining with hope. "It's showing them the truth." One by one, the enforcers began to lower their weapons, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion and, finally, to understanding. Even Commander Viren seemed affected, his cold demeanor cracking as the bond's energy washed over him. What is this?" Viren asked, his voice trembling. "I can feel it, the connection. It's beautiful." Zanara stepped forward, her expression softening. "This is the bond," she said. "It connects us all, not just as individuals but as a galaxy. It is a force for unity, for love. It is not something to fear." Viren hesitated, his gaze shifting between Zanara and Kale. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. Perhaps we were wrong," he said, his voice filled with regret. "Perhaps the bond is not a threat but a gift." The battle was over, the enforcers standing down as the bond's energy continued to spread. Kale felt a surge of relief, his heart swelling with hope. They had done it. They had shown the galaxy the true power of the bond. As the suns rose over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the planet, Kale and Zanara stood together, their hands intertwined. The bond between them pulsed with a steady, comforting rhythm, a reminder of the connection they shared. "We did it," Kale said, his voice filled with wonder. "We showed them the truth." Zanara smiled, her luminous eyes filled with love. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The bond will continue to grow, to connect us all. And we will be there to guide it." Kale nodded, his heart filled with a sense of purpose. "Together," he said. "Always." As they stood there, surrounded by their newfound allies and the beauty of the hidden planet, Kale knew that their journey was far from over. But whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united by the bond that had brought them together and changed the galaxy forever.